Um, we've got about 25 minutes for questions, so I don't know if anyone has a burning question right now, or we could have 10 minutes of the panel and then we'll throw it open to the floor. Does anyone have a burning question at the moment? You do. Could you just wait for the microphone? And could you say who you are and where you're...
Hello, my name is Richard Powell. I'm from Karmarama. It was something that James said at the start, organise the client globally to align on the need for a global brand. You started with that assumption, but it's a big first step. What does the panel think is the best argument for having a global brand? Because there are many alternatives, including fragmentation, which James inherited before those 7 years.
You'd like to go
I'll let you go first.
Yeah, sure. I think the point I made about clear roles and responsibilities is really important. Like, if you have the same team trying to be experts in creating a brand, finding an insight, executing the brand, if you have the same teams doing that in every single region and market, it's clear that they're not going to get very good at it very quickly. And it means that if you have, whereas in a global organization, one team do the global brand, the other activates. You just have really clear specialisms and capabilities that emerge. I think that's a really clear example. But also I think that so many global marketing businesses have now taken that model. And I think there's only a handful that have reverted back. And I think that looking at the brands and how they have changed before and afterwards is a really compelling case for other business leaders taking the call to organize their marketing capability in that way. So if I were making an argument, I might talk about those things, although that's not maybe as hard metrics as you might want. But I think the Snickers was quite compelling as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'd sort of look at it two different ways. I think there are global brands and then there are global brand campaigns. And I think the reality is, once you have a global brand, so once it's in 80 markets, and let's assume it's relatively consistent, at least from a packaging point of view, you've got a global brand. And to my mind at least, it makes sense from a business point of view, particularly in categories, and there are a few that don't follow this, but particularly in categories where increasingly you're going to be driven to drive efficiency. If you've got a global brand, it's pretty difficult to make the argument that you shouldn't be trying to achieve some level of efficiency in some way, in the way that you manage it. When you get to global campaigns, that's a more difficult argument to make, and I think you need to look at, and I could comfortably make arguments for either one. I think you need to look at the nature of the organization, the nature of the brand, where you play, what it is you're really trying to achieve, and then take a decision from there. From a global planning point of view, I'm not sure there are cookie cutter solutions. I think bespoke solutions to specific client needs and specific brands are probably what makes sense most of the time. But I think the argument is always there to be made one way or the other. It's just which is more compelling and which is right for the brand and the business at the time.
Do you have particular experience in this, or is it something that's coming?
I've got experience of doing it different ways, different outcomes. And I totally agree that the organisation needs to understand and align on the value of doing it a certain way, and then it sticks.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you end up redoing it, or others end up redoing it, doing it differently 6 to 9 months later, as you said.
I mean, Hamish, you were mentioning before the session that the way you're organised, your division is organised, is not the traditional Unilever model. Is that something you can tell us a bit more on?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk in broad terms about it. So, prestige is a very different end of the market, which Unilever has a bit less experience in. So we're in the business of acquiring brands who have that expertise in that scale. I think in order to move quickly, in our case, as we're growing and we're nurturing a smaller business, the flexibility you get in brand development and brand building being compressed can be advantageous, particularly as the businesses are quite small. I mean, Dove is a €1 billion brand. Some of the other businesses are less than a quarter of that. So you've got very different businesses. So what you get with having centralized teams is speed and agility. Obviously, with the global brands, you probably have a bit less speed. But that being said, growing a global brand is a long-term game. It takes years of teasing out a single insight and executing it well. And the more you do it, the better you get at it. So I think that the long-term and the slow nature of the global businesses isn't a reason to not take the global approach all the time. I think there'll be different cases in different categories. But I don't think speed is always necessarily something to to crave. Actually, sometimes some things do take time, and I think you do learn through execution as well as in the test phase. So it really depends on, I would say, it really depends on the business and the need that you have.
And Sue, you mentioned that you can use evidence from research to build a business case for having a global campaign. Is that something that's still very unusual, that people using the kind of research findings from Millward Brown or whoever their research supplier is to justify rolling something out or launching it as a global campaign?
I think, no, I think a lot of our clients do use that, and they use research to back up. But I think one of the issues is that previously the cost of doing the research to be able to say, look, does this idea, is this really a universal idea that applies everywhere, or where doesn't it apply? You couldn't make the research kind of ubiquitous enough by country or by media even to really look at it. So I think the sea change in the industry now is our ability to use technology and automation to make it possible and a lot faster and a lot cheaper to get that information back. So I think now that's become much more possible to do, and I think that's completely different. You go back a few years and it would be a completely different story. On the point of organisations and cookie cutters, might be me crackling, there isn't really a one-size-fits-all, no. I mean, we work with a lot of global advertisers, and they have, some people have very global, and then local, and then some have global in these regions, but these regions, I mean, we have to organise ourselves to mirror the client, and we have to be like jelly and mould ourselves into, dozens of different shapes in order to fit how their organisations are structured, and that's to do with their efficiencies, and it's to do with effectiveness. If one idea is about healthy skin, and that's one bunch of markets, another human truth might be just about functional things like cleanliness and hygiene, and that might be another group of countries. So it really depends on the organisation.
And have you found, each of you, that there are cultural differences in terms of receptivity to global ideas? So some organisations in different parts of the world might be more receptive to this idea of specialisation or using a global idea across different networks.
From a client point of view?
Yeah, so would you find it easier to work with North American Mars than European Mars, or the other way around? Or?
I think it tends to vary, to be honest, more by client culture than by sort of national culture or sort of regional culture, as it were. My experience has always been, if you go back and look at the history of a company and look at what a company fundamentally does, that will tell you a great deal about how it will sort of operate as a culture and how receptive it will be to ideas. So Mars has always been a sort of transatlantic company, so it was sort of founded in the UK and the US, and so it's always been very collaborative across the Atlantic, and it expanded really quickly. So it's always been very decentralized. So they've always been very open to multinational ideas and sharing and things like that. Different client cultures that build up in different ways, that have tended to have sort of more centralized command and control structure, and have just sort of exported people from Chicago to different markets to set up, tend to operate very differently. So I think it's more about the client's internal culture rather than national cultures.
And is technology making that easier to share? I mean, technically it makes it easy to share, but does it change the culture?
So one thing's really interesting about Unilever's culture is that when I joined Unilever 4 years ago, I was probably one of 5 other Brits I was working with. And so the culture inside Unilever is very much international. The people who look after the brands come from the brands where the brands are most prevalent. So that creates a real, I think, understanding, and not just knowledge, but real understanding about the brand in culture, in market, at a central level. So there's interesting questions around how you organise your marketing team to make that happen. I mean, Unilever is a community of over 7,000 marketers, so it's a lot of people, but I think we do pride, moving people around to make sure that we stay an international organisation at the heart. Technology is definitely shifting things. I think that we now have really powerful internal tools which we can use to access and share insight and to communicate things more effectively. I don't think that replaces picking up the phone and having a chat to Philippa in the Philippines, whatever, to talk about the campaigns.
That's a real example, I think.
Philippa's in the Philippines, let's go with it. So But I think there's using data more quickly to get feedback. Before you launch a massive juggernaut of a campaign and you invest so much behind it, try and make as many mistakes as you can before you switch on the media switch.
Yes.
Because it's very hard to turn that one off or to do anything to improve your effectiveness once you've turned on that switch. So you can make mistakes by exposing people in market to your work and saying, Filippo in the Philippines, what do you think of this work? And that's one way of getting feedback. But then you can also test ideas out in social media and see what gets the best pickup. Those soft human things that you would understand as being satisfied as a marketer yourself that something has worked are hugely valuable. I think that the marketing organizations who have what I call point of conversion online, who are selling things on their own website, are historically better at...
Like the EasyJet.
I bet because they got that data at their fingertips, like retailers, they're really good at looking at data and looking at what happens when things change. They tend to be a lot better, I think, at maybe making some enhancements incrementally. So I think that's kind of interesting skill swap is marketers who go from conversion-based businesses to non-conversion-based businesses. It's kind of a different skill set, different mindset.
And are there, I'm assuming there's a sort of different variety of agencies you're working with, more PR and activation than the sort of traditional creative agency, media agency mix of it. Is that true?
Yeah, there's a whole variety.
Magnus. Is the preference to brief those agencies jointly with the creative and media, or to do it separately, or what's the best sort of way of working at the moment, do you think?
I think that starting the brief from clear communications tasks and thinking about the role of communications is really important. I think it's really important to involve your media agency as you develop your brief before you go to a creative agency. There isn't a right answer about whether you brief your creative brief to a single brand agency or to lots of different agencies. It really depends on where you are with your relationship with those agencies and what you want to achieve. I think having worked agency side, I know I really thrive on the competitive nature of a pitch, and sometimes that produces interesting work. But I think equally, as I said, brands are muscle memories. The more you work it and the longer you try and nail a particular insight, the better the quality becomes. I think it's important to have really clear roles of agencies and partners, but there isn't a right and one answer to that question. It really depends on the client, the brand situation. But I think involving the media agency up front and it is important to getting the role of communications right, so people are working within a very clear swimming pool creatively.
James, how do you find working with other agencies? I mean, would you prefer to be briefed alongside everyone, or do you want...
I'd agree with Hamish. I mean, I think the key thing is clarity on what's the business problem you're trying to solve, what's the communication objective, and what's the role for communications. And then I think, as I said, I think once you get past the brief, what you need to strive for is a platform. Because if you take You're Not You When You're Hungry, it works across every single channel known to man and those that probably haven't yet been invented. It does. It's an idea that lends itself creatively to just about any possible expression that you want. So I think, I don't, frankly, I work for a creative agency. I'd like to think that we're the people who land them. But I don't care who lands the creative platform. What I care is that you end up with a platform for a brand that you can then leverage globally. And if the PR company comes up with a brilliant idea that you can then back into other stuff, I'm fine with that. I just think the key thing, as you say, is the content that you start with in the brief and sort of the point at which you start and where you point everybody. I think that's the key to getting to good solutions.
I think that the two bits that are really important is the one at the beginning, which you've been talking about, and then it's sort of and holding that together through the idea, and then it spreads into the media and the manifestations. But the next bit is the person at the end who's making sense of it all, who's the consumer. And so I think if you're really clear on that, of what the task and the target, and then you've got your technique, tactics and whatever, and then there's that person at the end, and it's getting that feedback loop, and then that's what holds it all together.
Yeah,
it's all right to operate in silos as long as you've got those two ends very, very clear.
I mean, can you tell us a little bit, why did it take 2 years to... Because in retrospect, like all impressive case studies, it feels as if it was obvious, the insight is obvious, but clearly it wasn't.
Well, obviously, that's what the case study says. It just popped out like that, obviously. It goes back to a lot of the points that have made. I mean, these are big organizations with lots of people, lots of stakeholders, big history. It takes time to work things through an organization. Now, we would have liked it to happen faster than that. It probably could have happened faster than that. But I don't think we would have done all the things we needed to do to bring all the different people along with us. And I'm not sure that we would have had a campaign that is now running in 92 markets 5 years on. We might have had a campaign that was running in 40 markets today, or a campaign that was running in 60 markets for 3 years, and now we've moved on to something else. So I genuinely believe that doing the spade work up front and really getting the business right up to the top to buy into what it is you're trying to achieve and where you're trying to go with it, and then ensuring that whatever you create, and again, it will vary from business to business, but whatever you create enables the local marketeers and critically, by the way, critically, the local sales team to do what they need to do is incredibly important. I mean, I keep wanting to write this talk that I keep being told I can't write, which is actually 80% of the success of advertising is getting the sales force on side. If the sales force likes the advertising, you're 80% of the way home and dry, because they'll get behind it, and then it almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's not quite that simplistic, but you got to get the whole organization invested in an idea, and that's when you really begin to see results in market.
Could we get the microphone to this? No, actually, we need the microphone so we can hear it for the filming. Here it is. Brilliant, thank you. Could you say where you're from?
Yeah, my name's Toby. I'm from Adam and Eve.
Thank you.
The two examples of work that you guys have shown today, so Magnum and obviously Snickers, I think are very, very good examples of not having your idea, but having a collective idea. So multiple markets can take ownership of the idea and deploy it in their way. And I think that's probably the golden rule to success on any kind of international global marketing. How do you guys believe the best way is to give people collective ownership of an idea and make them feel it's as much their idea as it is yours as a brand owner or custodian?
Well, that goes back to the 2-year question. So, as I say, we spent the best part of 2 years working with, so the way Mars is structured, we bring together the 10 marketing directors from around marketing directors from the 10 biggest markets, and we create a brand strategic leadership team. And we went on a journey together, and one of the great things, certainly on Snickers, was, because big organizations tend to churn people, everybody pretty much stayed together for that 2-year period. And so we co-created it. So literally the marketing director in the US, in Brazil, in the UK, in China, all felt like collectively we had gotten to that solution from a strategic point of view. And as I say, we invested a lot in what was our creative ambition and what we were trying to achieve. And it's about the only time in my career that it's been this sort of clean. But literally, when the creative idea popped out, and it was actually BBDO New York who wrote the original sort of scripts, I remember looking at it and presenting it to the team, and I think it was the marketing director in Meta who basically said, well, I mean, we kind of knew that this was what it would be, didn't we? I mean, it was just, everyone was so clear and so tight on what we were looking for that when the idea popped out, they could all see how they could adapt, they could all see how they could make it their own, and it was just so clear and obvious. Obviously, in hindsight, that's lovely. I have a raging debate with David Lubars, our global ECD. He's like, well, I mean, that hunger thing, I mean, that wasn't actually on the brief. I mean, we had to get to that creative. Well, yeah, but if I put it on the brief, David, you wouldn't have written that. But we were so clear and tight on what we were trying to achieve that it just popped out. But I think you need to bring everybody along with you, and it can be a slow process.
Is that something that you find you struggle with for your company? Is it something that...
And the one other thing I would say, and it's kind of relates to that, which is keep it as simple as possible. And again, to advertising marketers, that sounds obvious, but it's really easy to get caught up in there are 85 markets, there are different needs, etc. On the Snickers brief, it literally says this campaign must work for the US, and because it's 40% of the business, must work for the US, and if it can travel, brilliant. But so the US team focused on delivering a brilliant campaign for the US. Now, we were pretty confident, given all the work that we'd done in advance, given what we knew about the brief, et cetera, that whatever popped out, we would probably be able to work globally. But again, we focused them on just deliver a brilliant Super Bowl ad for this year and an idea that will last for 3 years in the US, and we'll take it from there. So again, just keeping it really simple, not getting them to worry about, oh God, will this work in China? Will this work in Turkey? What about...
Landing it in one market is success enough, and the collaboration and coordination to get that one market to do it is almost a good acid test for multi-market.
Yeah.
So actually that's quite a good way of working it, and having a good line of sight of who's your main customer in market, I think is really is really important.
And you also said something then, something on it working for 3 years. And I think, you know, a great idea is linked to a human truth, so it should be obvious. You know, that would be lovely. But if it can travel across media and travel across countries, but over time, because you know you're going to be arguing or wanting cooperation about that idea for a long time. So you knew that idea needed to last at least 2 years, because that's how long it took you, and you want it lasting
Right. I wasn't going back.
a hell of a lot longer than that. Yeah.
You've really got to hold your nerve, I think, if you are leading a campaign development process. You know, a good acid test is, can I think of 10 other ideas from this one idea? And if you can't, then you haven't got an idea. And you've got to be brave in the process of developing it with the team you're working with to call it and to continue to work until you get it. I think often, the process inside big organizations can be quite rigid. And so you might have a date by which you're meant to have finished all the work. But if you haven't got an idea behind that date, it's important that you sort of communicate with your colleagues in your markets about what now. And it might only be 1 or 2 other rounds of thought to get there, but you need to have an idea, yeah.
Okay, I think we've got 2 questions here, so can we take them both together? So perhaps
Ben from Mindshare. 2 really quick questions for James, if you don't mind, sorry. First one is, given that the seduction of the global campaign is often linked to economies of scale, either in a hero global asset or a simple execution, do you find something like Snickers, which is global idea, local assets and so on and so forth, do you find that a more complicated sale? And do you have to give examples like Snickers to sell it into other people?
That campaign was very easy. We had a client at the time whose view was that, because Mars was moving from being very decentralized to being somewhat more centralized, and we had a client whose view was, look, I know it won't be as efficient, but I want the local markets to buy into it. So he was very clear that he wanted an idea that could be adapted, and he recognized that he'd be sacrificing some efficiency for it. Now, in contrast, we've got an M&M's campaign, which, the talking M&M's, we produce 4 ads every year globally, and that's it. So, it's a campaign where we have, because it's been so consistent around the world, et cetera, we go for maximum efficiency on it. So it varies.
I think we had a question over here.
Oh, sorry, if this is okay. You referenced Byron Schott, and he had in his book a case study on Yorkie, which was a very blokey chocolate, but actually the sales base was very female.
Yep.
Had a significant amount of female, counterintuitive to what was thought. I'm just wondering whether this blokey concept did anything before or after to the gender stuff.
No. The consumption of almost all chocolate brands around the world is about 50-50.
Question here in the front.
Hi, Sophie from J. Walsh Thompson. It's just interesting to your point earlier of going back to the history of the brands. Has any of the panel come across a case where a brand has a real strong history or standout campaign, but then there's been a global idea that has now come in and had to sort of take over? And how has that worked?
Why do you ask?
Why do you think?
So you've got that happening at the moment, then?
It's got a brand with a strong history, but no yet a history of strong global advertising.
Yeah, or specifically maybe when there's been local executions where that brand stands for something in a local market, but now there's going to be a global campaign that will which has to supersede that.
And has a very different
Yeah,
positioning.
potentially, yeah.
Is it a big market that it's got?
It's a pretty generic.
Okay, because it does depend a bit on the size and the power of the market. Well, it's been battle of the ideas. I don't know. I can't think of any.
I think it depends how you do it. So Snickers is an example. We had a very successful campaign running here in the UK using Mr. T. Tagline was "Get some nuts." Now, we were lucky enough in that if you look at You're Not You When You're Hungry and Mr. T, they're fundamentally not really that different. But the UK client stuck with Mr. T for 2.5 years once You're Not You was running because it was working and it's a big market, and their view was, I'm not going to risk upsetting the apple cart. And we were fine with that because, as I say, they were pretty much telling the same story. So it's not quite the scenario you're talking about. I think it comes down to the business's tolerance for risk and what they're prepared to do. Because, my wife still calls it a marathon bar.
Yeah.
It's been Snickers here for 30 years. Somebody made the decision, took the hit. It's like, you know what, we want it to be a global brand. We'll take the hit. And there are risks associated with it, but it's all about risk mitigation.
And the problem you've got, so you're a different brand in different markets, and the challenge you have is how do I make them all, wrangle them all into one bigger idea?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I think there's a couple of examples. I mean, one example within Unilever is, I think, Sunsilk, which I think has been born out of some of the regional regions within Unilever, like developing markets. And that's now being organized under a single idea, which is called Go Shine. It's all about a global insight that we then went and uncovered over the last 3 years that's true for all of the consumers around the world, that they're kind of trying to tread the line between following the path of their mothers in terms of being into the tradition and old-fashioned, and then being modern women. So, and that's a struggle everyone in the audience was wrangling with. And the brand has become an empowering brand responding to the Indian side. What's really important, I think, if you are going to change the positioning of the brand or focus it, is keeping the brand cues, just the visual iconic stuff behind the brand there. So I think some really great examples of nostalgia brands which have come back to life, like Whisper. And the reason they work really well is because they refresh the memory structures around the brand, and suddenly it just comes back to life for you. If you were to totally change the visual arsenal of the brand, you're not going to be able to successfully reposition it, regardless of the insight you use. So my point is that the key thing is, are the visual icons, even the audio identity of the brand going to be maintained? Even if you are going to adjust the positioning in different markets, you may well be successful. We might go.
Could it be a life cycle thing? I don't know whether it operates in your case where, so again, going back to something like Sanex, it does depend, so it's a skin product, it does depend on the market, but a market that's currently about hygiene will, over time, move into, so could it be an evolution that in 2 years or 3 years that's adopted because you gradually work it through? But holding some of the cues.
Yeah.
Simple as that. Yeah.
Solid.
Does that spring any thoughts? Either you're going to break new ground or...
Yeah, no, that's been awesome. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, we'll have a think actually at the IPA if we can think of a case, but there's nothing that springs to my mind. I think the clock is against us unless, do you have one final question? Yeah?
Sure.
Hi, Jason from Ogilvy. So if we take Snickers as an example, it's a category and a brand that seemingly has a relatively cohesive audience, the sort of blokey dude. How do you think these thoughts change, or what caveats would you introduce if we were talking about either categories that are more complex in terms of brands that have many more products or brands that have many more target audiences? Do you think the global brand or the global brand campaign thought is as uniform, or does it depend significantly more?
Go ahead.
Yeah. God, I was going to wondering whether you were talking about an example again, or if it's something that.
So I'm currently working on consumer packaged goods, so it's more.
Is it quite theoretical, academic?
It's more theoretical from having worked on previous.
I think B2B is a good example, right? I think a good example of a well-defined B2B brand is IBM, which is all about smarter thinking, and that permeates everything that they do. It's the spirit in which all their communications is defined. So I think that comes across very clearly, even though their marketing is necessarily kind of fragmented by different stakeholders and channels. But the spirit of the smarter thinking brand comes through. I think it's actually an Ogilvy brand. So I think it's a good example. I mean, Amex is another good one. Access, service, rewards, well balanced by different channels and markets. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always possible to find a universal insight that will appeal to a universal sort of target audience that you're trying to reach. Because the reason I thought about it was I was trying to think of a brand that is so big and diverse that it's got just a ridiculous number of sort of possible target audiences. But I think in almost all of them, you can kind of distill it down to this is the essence of what this brand is all about. And therefore, this is a creative bullseye. So, the audience who at least initially you want to talk to, and then the challenge is to craft an idea that will then be broad enough appeal that you can talk to sort of a really disparate group. And I mean, and I think B2B is interesting. So GE is one of our big clients. And they sell everything from locomotives to financial services, although increasingly less and less financial services. And we do an enormously successful campaign for them that's basically to recruit young engineers to come and work for them. So talking to 18 to 22-year-olds, but also a campaign that's designed to talk to the city and get them to buy GE stock, and a campaign that's designed to talk to guys who are going to make $200 million purchases of jet turbines and things like that. So I mean, but the core idea holds it together, and there's a sort of core insight in what GE does and how GE operates that I think is consistent. So I think it might not always be easy. You're making trade-offs, but I think you can always find a fundamental insight and an idea that will hold all of it together.
I think it's quite cool, but a bit sneaky the way. So someone like John Lewis or a bank, they're selling mortgages to young people, pensions to anyone, well, everybody really should be having pensions, annuities later on, or soap powder soap to a granny and a candle to an upmarket family or something. God, I'm stereotyping like mad, but they're talking to lots of things, and they just do the trick of the life journey. There we are, we're with you all along the
You're going to need
way.
John Lewis at each stage of your life.
Yeah.
But the tone of voice is extremely clear for that brand. I think that for B2B brand, they need a really clear tone of voice. And ultimately, advertising is a weak force, so you don't need to nail the brand in every facet of it, in every case study or white paper that if it's B2B, they might be publishing. But at least bit by bit, it responds to the same voice, and that's very clearly defined and understandable. Then I think you'll ultimately build a brand in the long term, which is what brand building is.
Maybe, it's kind of priming. You're just trying to say you're a human being and we're relevant to you generally now. Boom, boom, boom. And so I do think it's back to, if it is a real human truth, then humans will respond to it, and then that primes them for either the experience you're going to give them or the next message you're going to give them.
Okay. I think we're going to have to call it a day, I'm afraid. So I just need to thank my panel, Sue Elms, Hamish Priest and James Miller, and thank you all for coming.